Where's the shooter? The SEAL team leader's voice was a ragged cry over the comms, shredded by panic as another high-caliber round splintered the air, punching his point man into the mud behind a shattered wall. They were pinned, helpless, for 3 agonizing hours. Staff Sergeant Martha Callahan, a woman the world believed was knitting by a fireplace, lay submerged in an icy irrigation canal. At 65, her body was a roadmap of past wars, but her mind was a razor. The Taliban marksman, perched 900 meters away, never saw the ghost who rose from the water. But the SEALs heard the shot, then the calm, steady voice of a legend they thought long dead. Target down. Matty out. Before I tell you exactly who that voice belonged to and why the most elite warriors on Earth owed their lives to a grandmother, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps us find more stories like this for you. Now let's get into it. The story of Martha Matty Callahan doesn't begin in the blood and dust of Afghanistan, but in the quiet, snow-dusted expanse of Montana. The low, rhythmic hum of the John Deere tractor was the soundtrack to Martha Callahan's retirement. At 65, her hands, knotted with the beginnings of arthritis, were surprisingly deft as she tightened a hydraulic line. Silver hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, revealing a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come only from decades of squinting against desert suns and Montana blizzards. Her blue eyes, however, were a startling contradiction, clear, sharp, and possessing a chilling stillness that hinted at a life far removed from fixing farm equipment. This quiet patch of earth, nestled against the jagged teeth of the Rocky Mountains, was her fortress of solitude, a peace she had earned through decades of noise and chaos. The government pension was modest, but the silence was golden. That peace was shattered not by a sound, but by a shadow. A colossal, predatory shadow that fell over her barn, followed a split second later by the percussive whump 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 of rotor blades beating the cold mountain air into submission. A UH-60 Black Hawk, painted a non-reflective matte black, hovered over her pasture, its downdraft flattening the tall grass. 2 men in crisp suits rappelled down, their movements jarringly tactical against the rustic backdrop. Martha didn't flinch. She simply wiped her greasy hands on a rag, her gaze steady. She knew this wasn't a social call. The ghost of her past had come knocking. 24 hours later, she stood in a place that was the antithesis of her Montana ranch. The Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, conference room at Fort Dominion, Virginia. The air was frigidly air-conditioned and thick with the scent of sterile electronics, strong coffee, and testosterone. 15 men, the absolute apex predators of the American military, sat around a polished mahogany table. Delta Force colonels, SEAL captains, Green Beret team leaders. They were all under 40, physical specimens carved from granite, their eyes holding the confident lethality of men at the peak of their power. Then, the door opened, and General Hayes, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weight of command, escorted Martha in. A collective, almost inaudible shift occurred in the room. Jaws didn't drop, but eyes narrowed. Posture stiffened. They saw a woman who could be their mother or grandmother. She wore a simple, functional pantsuit that looked 2 decades out of style, her movements deliberate, almost stiff. She was an antique in a showroom of bleeding-edge weaponry. A young Delta major, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, leaned over to the SEAL captain next to him. "Is this a joke?" he whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Did they pull her out of a retirement home?" General Hayes's eyes flashed with cold fire. "Major, this is Martha Callahan, and I suggest you show some respect for the woman who wrote the playbook you think you perfected." He gestured for Martha to take a seat at the head of the table, a place of honor that only deepened the confusion in the room. He opened a thin, almost empty file. There were no digital records on Martha. Her career was a relic of the analog age. For those of you who only read the last 10 years of history, Hayes began, his voice cutting through the tension, "Let me introduce you to Matty. In the 1980s, while you were learning to walk, she was an instructor at the Army Sniper School. But before that, during the coldest days of the Cold War, she had another name. The East German Stasi called her Die Danube Ghost. He paused, letting the name sink in. The Danube Ghost. A phantom sniper credited with dismantling 3 separate Soviet spy rings along the Iron Curtain, a legend whispered about in intelligence circles, but never confirmed. The file is thin because her most significant work was never officially documented. Hayes continued, his eyes fixed on the skeptical major. She is an expert in unconventional warfare, long-range infiltration, and what the old-timers used to call tradecraft. And right now, we need a ghost more than we need a hammer. The major remained unconvinced, his gaze sweeping over Martha's aged hands, her wrinkled neck. He saw weakness. He saw liability. What he failed to see was the cold, patient river of experience flowing just beneath the surface, a current that had drowned men far more dangerous than him. Martha simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, letting his doubt wash over her like water off a stone. The mission briefing began, and the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Satellite images flooded the massive screen at the front of the room, showing a bleak, fortified compound in the heart of Helmand Province, Afghanistan. It was surrounded by a complex web of irrigation canals, a defensive moat of mud and water. Our target, General Hayes stated, his voice grim, is Zaid al-Nuri, a former commander in the Afghan Special Forces trained by us. He's gone rogue, taken 32 American contractors hostage, and fortified himself in his ancestral home. An image of Zaid appeared on screen, a man in his late 40s with a charismatic smile and cold, calculating eyes. Martha felt a familiar, unwelcome pang in her chest. She knew that face, not just from a file, but from memory. I trained him, she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the room. All eyes snapped to her. Fort Bragg, 1995. He was my star pupil. Smart, intuitive, a natural marksman. I taught him how to think, how to anticipate. The Delta Major scoffed, this time openly. And now he's using everything you taught him against us. He's already wiped out 2 SEAL teams we sent in. They tried a night assault, and he was waiting for them. It was a slaughter. With all due respect, General, sending in his 70-year-old teacher seems desperate. I'm 65, Major, Martha corrected him, her voice as flat and cold as a frozen lake. And you're right. He knows our modern playbook because I helped write it. He expects a helicopter assault. He expects a heavily armed breach. He is waiting for the hammer. He will never expect the scalpel. She turned to the satellite image. What he doesn't know is what my father taught me. Her mind drifted back for just a second to a different river, a different time. Montana, 1965. She was a skinny 10-year-old girl, shivering on the bank of the Flathead River. Her father, a grizzled World War II veteran who had fought his way across Europe, stood beside her, his presence as solid as the mountains behind them. He wasn't teaching her to shoot. He was teaching her to see. The river doesn't fight the rocks, Matty, he had told her, his voice a low rumble. It doesn't try to smash through them. It flows around, under and over. It uses the path of least resistance. It's patient. Water can wear down stone, but stone can never stop water. Be the river, kid, not the rock. That lesson had saved her life a dozen times. It was the core of her philosophy, the secret behind the Danube Ghost. While others planned assaults, she planned infiltrations. While they carried more ammo, she carried more patience. Back in the briefing room, she pointed a steady finger at the screen. Those canals. What's the water temperature? An intelligence analyst typed furiously. 62 degrees Fahrenheit, ma'am. Hypothermia sets in within an hour. It's a non-viable infiltration route. For you, Martha said, her eyes locking onto the Delta Major. Your men are conditioned for explosive action, for carrying 80 pounds of gear. Their bodies are furnaces that burn hot and fast. My body is a slow-burning coal. With the right thermal gear and conditioning, I can last for maybe 5 hours in that water. That's enough time to get into position, dismantle his command structure from the outside, and create the opening you need. The Major stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You want to send a senior citizen on a solo suicide mission? Her body won't handle the shock. Her hands won't be steady enough to make the shot. Martha met his furious glare without blinking. Major, you see an old woman. Zaid sees his mentor. He respects my abilities, but he, like you, will underestimate me because of my age. He'll believe I'm a relic, incapable of this kind of mission. That assumption is the most powerful weapon we have. He's prepared for your strength. He is utterly unprepared for my weakness. She held up her hand, showing the slight tremor of age. You see a tremor. I see a lifetime of learning how to control my breathing to make that tremor disappear when it counts. You can send in another team of young, strong men to die. Or you can send in the one person on Earth who knows exactly how his mind works, because I'm the one who built it. The room was silent. General Hayes leaned forward, his decision made. She's not going in solo. Master Sergeant Cole, Sergeant First Class Ramirez, you're her support team. You will set up Overwatch and you will follow her orders to the letter. Is that understood? Cole, a seasoned operator who had seen it all, simply nodded, his eyes appraising Martha with a new level of respect. The plan was crazy, but in a world of impossible missions, sometimes the craziest plan was the only one that worked. The Afghan night was a blanket of absolute black, moonless and cold. At 0200 hours, nearly 2 miles from Zaid's compound, Martha Callahan slipped into the dark, murky water of the canal. The initial shock was a physical blow, a vicious, all-encompassing cold that stole her breath and made the muscles in her back seize. The 5mm wetsuit with its thermal layers felt woefully inadequate against the deep, penetrating chill. At 65, her body didn't generate heat like it used to. Every calorie was precious. Behind her, Master Sergeant Cole and Sergeant Ramirez set up their Overwatch position on a low ridge, their thermal optics painting the world in ghostly shades of white and gray. They watched her silhouette, a small, dark shape, melt into the colder gray of the water until she was gone. Danube Ghost is in the water, Martha whispered into her throat mic, the words a low vibration. The current was sluggish but powerful, pulling at her with surprising strength. The bottom was a treacherous mix of soft mud that threatened to steal her boots and sharp, unseen rocks. Every step was a calculated risk. For a young soldier, this would be a grueling physical test. For Martha, it was a battle of will against the limitations of her own biology. An hour in, the cold was no longer a sharp shock but a deep, gnawing ache in her bones. The arthritis in her hips and knees flared, sending dull, throbbing pulses of pain with every movement. Her core temperature, monitored by a sensor on her wrist, had dropped to 96 degrees. Safe for now, but the downward trend was steady. She could feel her energy being leached away by the relentless water. In her mind, she heard her father's voice again, a calming anchor in the storm of physical misery. The cold is just a thing, Matty. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't want to win. It just is. Respect it, endure it, and it will let you pass. She moved with a painful slowness that would have been a liability for any other operator. But her movements were also perfectly silent. She didn't fight the current. She used it, letting it guide her into the deeper, darker channels. She breathed slowly, deliberately, through the closed-circuit rebreather, conserving every molecule of oxygen, every ounce of energy. This wasn't about speed. It was about economy of motion, a skill honed over a lifetime. 90 minutes in, her shivering was becoming more pronounced, a fine tremor that started in her extremities and worked its way inward. 95 degrees. Dangerous territory. She paused behind a thick clump of reeds, forcing her mind to take control. She mentally detached from the pain, cataloging it, acknowledging it, and then setting it aside. This was the discipline her father had taught her, the true meaning of being the river. The body had its limits, but the will was something else entirely. She pictured her granddaughter's face, her bright smile, and the promise of seeing the first snow in Montana. That was the warmth she focused on, a small, fierce flame burning in the cold darkness of her mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw it. A dark, jagged shape against the slightly less dark sky. a natural dam of storm debris and refuse, less than 500 meters from the compound's central building. Her designated hide. It took her another 20 minutes to cover the last 100 meters, her body screaming in protest with every pull of her arms. She wedged herself into the debris, a tangled mess of branches and mud that provided perfect concealment. She was finally in position. With excruciatingly slow and deliberate movements, she unsealed the waterproof case and retrieved her rifle. It wasn't a modern, modular weapon system. It was her old M24, a bolt-action rifle that felt more like an extension of her own arm. The wooden stock was worn smooth from her hands, the steel cold and familiar. She had hand-loaded the .300 Winchester Magnum rounds herself, each one a testament to her meticulous patience. She settled in, raised the scope to her eye, and began her work. The world shrank to the circular view of her optic. The pain, the cold, the exhaustion, it all faded into the background. There was only the mission. She began her count. 17 guards. She watched their routes, their rhythms, the way they held their rifles, the moments they paused to smoke. In the cold heart of the Afghan night, the Danube Ghost was hunting once more. Dawn in Afghanistan is not a gentle affair. It arrives swiftly, a blade of pale light slicing across the horizon, turning the gray landscape into stark relief. For Martha, settled in her muddy hide, the coming light was a deadline. Her body was failing. Her core temperature had dropped to a critical 93 degrees. The violent shivering had subsided, replaced by a dangerous numbness and a growing mental fog. She knew the signs. She had hours, maybe less, before her systems began to shut down permanently. But she also knew Zaid. He was arrogant. He would want to make a statement at sunrise. At 0530, just as the first call to prayer echoed from a distant village, he appeared. Zaid al-Nuri strode into the compound's courtyard, exuding the confidence of a king in his castle. He was flanked by 2 guards. Martha's crosshairs settled on his temple, a perfect, still image. She could end it now. But the hostages were still an unknown variable. A dead leader could trigger a massacre. Patience. Be the river. Cole's voice crackled in her ear, a tinny whisper. Predator feed shows multiple heat signatures. Northwest building, lower floor. We think that's them. Moments later, Martha's patience was rewarded. Zaid marched directly to that building. His men followed with trays carrying exactly 32 portions of food. A wave of cold relief washed through Martha, a feeling that had nothing to do with the water. They were alive. The waiting stretched on. Every minute was a new battle against the encroaching lethargy of severe hypothermia. She had to force her eyes to stay sharp, her mind to stay clear. Then at 0615, Zaid reemerged, dragging an American contractor with him. He was holding a video camera. Execution. The world narrowed. The aching joints, the frozen fingers, the mental fog. It all vanished, burned away by the singular, crystalline focus of a lifetime of training. Her breathing slowed until it was almost non-existent. Range, 447 meters. Wind, negligible in the early morning air. She inched the barrel of her M24 above the water, the optic clearing with a single, practiced wipe. Her hands, which had been trembling uncontrollably just moments before, were now as steady as granite. It was a nexus of will and muscle memory, a place beyond pain and age. Zaid raised a pistol to the contractor's head and began to speak for his camera. He never finished the sentence. The crack of the M24 was sharp and definitive in the crisp air. The .300 Winchester Magnum round, traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, crossed the distance in an instant. Zaid's head snapped back, and he collapsed in a heap before the sound of the shot even reached his men. Before his body hit the ground, Martha had already worked the bolt, the motion fluid, economical, perfected over 50 years. The second round took out the cameraman. The third dropped the guard holding hostage. 3 shots in less than 4 seconds. Chaos erupted. Zaid's fighters, stunned and leaderless, poured into the courtyard, making themselves easy targets. Martha slipped into the rhythm, the cold, deadly calculus of her trade. Bolt, breathe, squeeze, cycle. Another fighter fell. Bolt, breathe, squeeze, cycle. Another. It wasn't a firefight, it was a harvest. Delta and SEALs are inbound. 3 minutes out. Cole's voice was electric in her ear. Martha didn't need 3 minutes. She shifted her aim to the compound windows, eliminating threats before they could even organize a defense. A fighter raised his rifle to execute the hostages inside. Her bullet found him through the glass. When the thunder of Black Hawks descended and operators swarmed the compound, the fight was already over. Martha Callahan, running on nothing but fumes and sheer will, had neutralized 12 enemy combatants in under a minute. She tried to pull herself from the canal, but her limbs wouldn't obey. When Cole and Ramirez reached her, she was barely conscious, her skin a deathly blue-gray. Her core temperature was 91 degrees. As they carried her to the extraction chopper, Cole looked down at the old woman in his arms. She was shaking violently, her body a fragile, frozen shell. But she opened her eyes, and in their depths, he saw not weakness, but a fire that refused to be extinguished. The fire of a legend. Later, back at Fort Dominion, the debriefing room was silent. The same 15 men stood as Martha entered, this time with no escort. She was in a wheelchair, a thick blanket wrapped around her, but she held her head high. The Delta Major who had mocked her stepped forward. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a heavy, custom-minted challenge coin into her hand, his unit's highest symbol of respect. An honor rarely, if ever, given to an outsider. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with an apology more profound than words could ever convey. Martha simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. No apology was necessary. She had just been doing her job. This wasn't just a victory. It was a testament to a forgotten truth. In an age of high-tech drones and satellite warfare, the single most dangerous weapon on the battlefield can still be a human being with more experience and a stronger will to win. True legends are not forged in the fire of youth, but tempered in the ice of a long, hard life. Have you ever completely underestimated someone based on their appearance or age, only to be proven profoundly wrong? What would you have done if you were in that briefing room and a 65-year-old woman proposed a mission everyone else considered suicide? Do you think that in our modern world, we have come to overvalue youthful energy and undervalue the quiet wisdom that only comes with a lifetime of experience? If this story reminded you that heroes come in all ages, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the unsung legends who walk among us. Share this with someone who knows that age is just a number, but experience is priceless. We read every single comment and appreciate your thoughts. More stories about impossible missions and the incredible soldiers who accomplish them are waiting for you on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another story that proves you should never, ever judge a book by its cover.